We're on page 117 in the Maimer Ivdu Hashem Simcha. The previous Rebbe said this Maimer, Shabbos Pashas Chayasara, 1938. V'hinei bedugma kazois yuvin bihisavos bale gvul melikus. The Rebbe says we're going to use the previous explanation of Simcha and Yira coming together with the analogies that he shared to explain another fascinating idea that's brought in Chassidus and in Kabbalah. And what is that? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates Balei Gvul, men of limitation, ideas of limitation, Me'elokus, from godliness. And this is something that should be troubling. How can, from an infinite God, or better said, from a transcendental God, there be created finite beings and something that's finite? Seemingly, if the Creator, if Hashem, is Beli Gevul, beyond limitations, what He creates is also Beli Gvul. And yet we're all here sitting at a shir. So the Rebbe says, Bedugma Kazois, by using the previous ideas that we discussed, this will help us understand better Behisavos, the creation, the ability to create Balei Gvul, limitation, Gvul, Melikus. The whole Mashin Esava, everything that's created, he goes back to the principle of Ram that he shared earlier, which is very important. And mind you, this principle is not a chidush of Chassidus. This idea that everything has an origin and a source in the heavenly abode is a Jewish concept in Chazal. Over the centuries, been developed by the Mekubalim, by the Chokrim, by the Hasidim, by the Ashkenaz, the Litvaks, the Litvische. Everyone in their own way has developed this idea. This isn't, a novelty of Chassidus. You look into Reb Sadia Goin in his book called Emunas V'Deos, and you'll see this concept there. And he was before the Baal Shem Tov, way before. Reb Sadia Goin, one of our Goinim, during the Gaonic period. And so we find this in the Rambam and in many others. And the idea is, Hakol Yeshlo Shoidish Umoker Lamaila. And we need to knock this through our head. Everything has a source in heaven, meaning everything begins in heaven. See, just for a moment, if our analysis of life is, it begins here, and from here it triggers a response there, we have it wrong. We have it backwards. It doesn't work that way. It begins there. It begins in purity, in Elokus. And from Elokus, it extends itself to us. How is this similar to what we learned earlier? Because what we're saying, Hillel, is that the sweetness of an apple didn't begin in the apple as we have it coming off a tree. This notion of the sweetness of the apple began with an idea, a notion. And that notion began in the Mazel HaRuchni, which we explained yesterday, the spiritual counterpart of the apple. And again, the example I gave you is that the student's ability to create and develop and benefit begins all in the mind of the teacher if he is a good teacher. In other words, and there's another thought that you might have seen in Chassidus and other writings. Yisrael olu b'machshava, Avi. Jews ascended in God's thought. It's a very important line and concept in Hasidism, in all of Hasidism. that the Jewish person, that the Jewish neshama doesn't come just from God's speech. There should be a soul. And it doesn't come from God's action. He made a soul. It's olu b'machshava. It ascended in the thought. This is, by the way, Tanya chapter 2, if you want more clarity on this idea. Where the Balatanya introduces this idea to us to understand that this neshama, which he calls the nefesh elikis, the godly soul, is associated with machshava, thought. Thought is more refined than speech and action. The Rebbe told my father in 1960, in March of 1960, he was married. My mother, his parents were in Tel Aviv in Eretz Yisrael, and they didn't come, they couldn't come. My grandfather was scared to fly, and he would always cite the verse, Ashrei Yoshev Eisecha, lucky is the man who stays home, don't travel. He went through the Holocaust, he was a soldier in the army. God saved his life. He brought his family from Romania to Eretz Yisrael in 49. I'm staying put. But my son's getting married. You get married, son. I ain't coming. I don't go on a plane. And he never got on a plane. Right? Now, this idea of something having a source in heaven, it can be seen in every situation. So the Rebbe, going back to the story, so the Rebbe, my father goes into Yechidus with the Rebbe, and he says, "Dear Rebbe, I have no one here. I'm by myself. My parents are there. My siblings are there. My relatives are there. I'm by myself. I have cousins, distant cousins in Canada, but no one's here in Brooklyn. Please officiate at my wedding." The Rebbe tells my father, "I'd love to do it, but just a month ago, in February of 1960, we enacted a new behavior that we do not give chuppah and kedushin anymore because we simply don't have the time to do it for whatever reason." So my father's very good friend, Rabbi Korf, who was the head shliach in Florida, Rabbi Avram Korf, he was the last one to officially get chuppah and kedushin from the Rebbe. There were a few exceptions in the next 2-3 years, but they were exceptions and reasons for the exceptions. And the Rebbe says to my father, to make an exception for you, it's not fair. Again, why he made exceptions for 2, 3, 4 other people, that's it. From 1960 to 64 is another discussion. But generally, everyone was turned down. But the Rebbe told my father in that Yechidus, "But I will think about you when you're standing under the chuppah. Notify Rabbi Chadek of my secretary to let me know that you're standing under the chuppah, and I will think about you when you're standing under the chuppah." So my explanation of those words are that my parents had this chus that they were connecting with the Rebbe's machshava, his thought, which is more than him saying the words b'dibur, standing b'maisa at the chuppah. Although, of course, we see someone standing, we heard that, or we hear him speak. We, the receivers, get more animated and excited from seeing the physical. But the truth is that the ruchni, is the machshava, is much deeper, much higher, much greater. So yes, it doesn't tickle the fancy. It doesn't excite us. Nevertheless, the emes is that it's a higher and deeper experience. So I say that because here we're learning the ukiyadua, and you see the previous Rebbe says the word kiyadua. Whenever you see the word kiyadua, you have to ask yourself, what's kiyadua? As is known. It's like it's on a big billboard in Times Square. Oh, really? I wish we would have this as a billboard than the other schmutz. But we don't have that as a billboard, or in Tel Aviv. Ukiyadua. What's kiyadua? The sharshei ha-ruchni shall kol davar, that the spiritual source of every matter, hu b'madrega gavaya vel yoina yoiser, is on a higher level. And this is the kiyadua. The kiyadua is that thought is deeper and more sensitive and greater than speech and action. So the fact that something begins in ruchnius, that is the truth. That is its beginning. The beginning of something. There's another famous line that we use. It's brought. Kol hascholot kashot. Kol hascholos kashos. All beginnings are difficult. To break through. Imagine. Let's each of us imagine we began our career. We began our path. It was haschalat kasha. The fear of the unknown. How much am I going to have to work to get my degree? How am I going to manage with a new person in my life? Anyone that doesn't think about this, I'm sorry to say, is very shallow and immature. Nevertheless, you have to jump in and you have to have faith. Hashem wants you to be married. It's going to work out as long as you're a mensch. Right? I'll go upon him. We have the issue that everything begins in ruchnius. Let's continue. The whole davar shenasava, to the point that everything that's been created, hu be'ein haroich legabe shorshay. This is another additional insight. I want you to make a note to yourselves. This is either in writing or in your head. Ad the whole davar shenasava, to the point that everything that's created, hu be'ein haroich, is Adam finaitim, has no comparison legabe shorshay. The Gashmius Yaakov that we see in its intrinsic value compared to the Ruchnius is Ein Aroich. But you say, wait a minute, the Gashmius I could touch, the Gashmius I could feel, I could smell, and it's in the bank. It's real, Yoinisim. Says Chassidus, it's real from our perspective. And it is real from our perspective. And even from Hashem's perspective, it's real. But if you compare the value of Gashmias to its source, the Ruchnias, no comparison. Right? Who do you like being around? Someone who is, like we said yesterday, a jokester, a player. In Yiddish we use the word a chevraman, Yeah, that's good for a nice cup of tea or coffee or popcorn at a ball game or watching the Super Bowl on your couch. You need some excitement, so you got some excitement. But when you want real ruchnias, that's not where you go. It's like there are people, you probably all know this, that for the Yom Neiroim, for the high holidays, they go back to their yeshiva to daven in their yeshiva, even though they live far away. In the Litvischer world, it used to be more, and even today, they used to go back to Slobodka. I even know some of the Talmidim, Rabbanim, I'm sure Yaakov is aware. They were outside and they came back to Slobodka for the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Or take, for example, the Baba Sali. People don't know this, so I'm going to tell you now. Where was the Baba Sali for Elul? The Baba Sali, yes, Yonason? I don't hear you.
He was in Paris.
In Paris. Very good. Yonason knows. He went to the Lubavitch Yeshiva in Paris, in Brunois. He left Morocco, and he came to the Lubavitch Yeshiva in Brunois, Paris, and he spent a good part of Elul for like 10, 11 consecutive years. He did have students of his that from Morocco that were there in the yeshiva, that's also true. But he liked the quietness, and he especially liked some of the Lubavitch Chassidim that were big Ivdu Hashem, like Reb Nissen Nemanov and others. And this has been written about. In fact, I included some in my book on Chabad and Sfardim. What's the point? The point is that when you're seeking emes, when you're seeking spirituality, I guess you should say lahavdil, not lahavdil. You go to the mountaintop in Montana or New Mexico. I mean, we hopefully have a mountaintop right in your apartment in Bet Shemesh. Like, the famous joke. I daven every morning at the wall, at the Kaisel. Which wall? The wall of my house. Yeah. if you're able to make the kaisel, the wall in your house, like the kaisel Amaravi in Yerushalayim, in the old city, kol hakavod. But who's able to do that? Few. Or not every day. So too, what we're learning here is that there is an ad infinitum, ein aroch. In other words, you might argue, Avi, that Gashmias compared to Ruchnias, it's not as great. It's not as valuable, but there is some association. When Chassidus uses Avram, the language Ein Aroch, right away it has to trigger in your head, there's no comparison. Ad infinitum. Ein Aroch. There's nothing at all. Let's continue. As it is in the scenario of the blade of grass compared to the mazel, to the spiritual energy that sustains it. Like we said earlier, there's no comparison. Says the Rebbe, so it is for everything that's been created on earth. Shehudug milavad. It is only, what's created is only a dugma. It's only an example in comparison to the lowest level within the spiritual, which is source. So in other words, what we see here is not what you get. You know the expression, you see what you get? No. What you see here is only a dugma. You know what a dugma is, right? Like someone was telling me the other day, he has a very severe back problem issue, maybe operating, so he got someone in Europe to make him a 3D dimension of his back. A 3D model of his back. Amazing what you could do today. So that the doctor can actually see, because he feels the doctors are missing, they're not finding what he believes is the issue. So he hired someone in Ukraine to make him a 3D model, and he sent it to the doctor, and now he not only can he challenge the doctor here, he can say, look at it, look. So, a dugma, but let me ask you, is the 3D model his actual back? No. His spine? No. The spine is the spine. But the 3D the model of the spine is a dugma. So the Rebbe says here, that the gashmis, the blade of grass, is only a dugma of the spiritual counterpart of a blade of grass in its source. Says the Rebbe, so it's also regarding man, Adam. We read in the Nevuas Yecheskel that we all, Klal Yisrael, say, I believe on Shavuos, right? There's a chariot, and there's 4 faces, and one's called the Pnei Adam She'al HaMerkava, the face, a human face on the chariot, right? So Chassidus explains that the Adam Lamata, man here below, is Ein Aroch. Is no comparison regarding the supernal man, Adam Ha'elyon, that's on the chariot, for example. But man is man. Yes, man is man. And without man here, guess what? Adam Ha'elyon can be Adam Ha'elyon, but he can't go anywhere. He needs us to walk and put on tefillin and give tzedakah and say hello, etc., right? That's true. That's true. So, we're not discounting the virtue of Gashmias. But what we're saying is that you must know it's Gashmias. And that Gashmias is important because it is an extension of Ruchnias. And if it's there in Ruchnias, the Gashmias is important. If it's not there in Ruchnias, the Gashmias is not important. So, hypothetically speaking, if you could imagine, Yonason, that you have something Gashmis, that doesn't, Gashmi, physical, that doesn't have a spiritual counterpart, it shouldn't be of interest to you. Right? And that's why when we confront things that are indulgences and unhealthy for us physically or spiritually, if you're tuned in to Ruchnius, you ask yourself, is this issue that my heart desires and lusts, etc., etc., is there a place for this in Ruchnius? If there is, go for it. And if there isn't, stay away from it. That's the barometer. Could you imagine if we thought this way every day about all the issues? I told you the story, right? My friend, I used to learn with him Tanya once a week in Midtown Manhattan. He calls me one day in the 5th or 6th year. We learned for 10 years. We finished the 53 chapters once a week. So he calls to say, Rabbi, thank you very much for learning with me Tanya. So I say, what? You're welcome, but tomorrow I'm going to see you. We're scheduled to learn. You could have told me tomorrow when you see me. Why are you calling me specially? He says, because I came out of a meeting now. And in this meeting, there was an ethical question of how we should act, what we should do. And before we made a decision, I realized and asked myself the following question. What would the Beinani say? The Beinani, the prototype of the Tanya. What would he answer to this ethical question? And that's how I made my decision. I gave them my answer. And the sensitivity and consciousness to think like a Beinani, even though I'm not a Beinani, but my mindset should think that way because of our learning Tanya for 5-6 years. So I've been sensitized to a certain way of thinking. And since you taught me that, I'm thanking you. And I just came out of the meeting, so of course I can tell you tomorrow. But this just happened. It's fresh news, hot off the press. So the Nekuda is that this idea that the Rebbe says here, which is such an important idea in life, to look at things in its ruchnis, in its source, is very, very important. This idea is also relevant when we encounter hardships and difficulties, whatever they may be. There too, you have to step back and ask yourself, what's the spiritual significance of this hardship? And you'll be surprised. Sometimes you'll actually conclude it's good for me. It makes me a stronger person. Yes, I would always like to be spiritual and happy. And like I told you yesterday, at the greatest time of happiness, we break a glass under the chuppah. And everyone does it. Right? Everyone does it. Why? Because we see that the breaking of the glass, we understand it to be an upgrade, not a downgrade. Because if it was a downgrade, we wouldn't do it. Or another example. It was the yard site of Rabbi Yisrael Ruzhner this Shabbos, Gimel Cheshvan. It's brought in Chabad Sefer Minhagim that the Ruzhner on Tisha B'Av, he would encourage the children to throw these burrs, they're called. They have little thorns. And the shul became a fiasco of kids throwing these burrs at the men, crying and saying kinnis and saying eicha, and it became a balagan. And they wanted to stop it. Said the holy Rishner, the Heilige Rishner said, leave them alone. But they said, Rebbe, it's Tisha B'Av. It's Tisha B'Av. If you're really mourning, burrs are not going to stop you from mourning. Try stopping someone who's really in mourning. Nothing will stop when they're in the mode of mourning. Oh, you're not really in the mode of mourning. You're doing it because we used to joke, we used to say that you put in front of the Baal Tefillah on the Amud when he goes over, right? Shavisi Hashem lenegdi summit. And it used to be called, do you have a Shavisi? Moshe, you're a Gabbai. Do you have a Shavisi? And that meant, is there a Shavisi on the Amud so the Chazan, the Baal Tefillah, can see Hashem is always before you. So the joke was, the word was, is the Shavisi only on the Amid, or is the Shavisi in your heart? Where is the Shavisi? Yeah, where is Tisha B'Av? Are you mourning, or Tisha B'Av is mourning and you are elsewhere, even though you're saying the words? And that's a private thing that everyone has to think about. So the holy Badichever, he knew about the holiness and specialty of a day like Tisha B'Av. Of course he did. And believe me, he was shattered. But he felt, for whatever reason, at that time, and maybe for eternity, as I said, it's brought in in Chabad Minhagim, it's very strange that that's brought, that adding that element is important to Tisha B'Av. However we understand it, I don't want to go into that, whether it is a good explanation, not a good explanation. All I'm saying is that we're learning here that the Ruchnius, the source of the blade of grass, the source of man, which is supernal man, that's the Ikar. So I'm taking this idea and trying and making it more practical in daily life, to look at a situation from the heavenly perspective. From the heavenly perspective, there are challenges, there are issues, and obviously they make us better, not worse. And therefore they're necessary. So when Yaakov Avinu, soon we'll be learning the Parsha. I love this Rashi. Bikesh Yaakov Leishav B'Shalva. Yaakov wants to sit peacefully. Says Rashi, Kofza Olav Rugzoi Shel Yosef. Springs upon him. Kofza Olav, jumps upon him. Rugzo Roges, the anger, the wrath, the situation of Yosef. Yaakov, you want to be content? Hey Yosef, Yitzchak, Avram, Chaim, you want to be content? Kofza Olav Rugzo Shel Yosef. So one way of looking at it is, remember, don't sit and get too comfortable in Golus, right? That's a more straight halachic way of looking at it. A deeper way of looking at it is that the Kofza Olav Rugza Shel Yosef makes it that the Yaakov will sit really b'shalva. How does Yaakov really experience shalva, serenity? Avi, how? When he has the issues, the problems. The problems make you stronger. The problem, as someone said a few weeks ago in the Shir, I forget who, but it was that we look at it as a challenge. Yavi, I think, said it. It's challenges. The challenges are an integral part of experiencing the shalva. That's the way I'm taking these few lines that we're learning and placing it on a platter for our own minds and hearts to work with. And when we reverse roles and we don't do that, but we focus mostly on the Gashmias, we get very, very disappointed. Let's continue. We have another few minutes. Mikol Makoim. Nevertheless, says the Rebbe, very, very well, very nice. Hiniksiv, the Torah says, Nasa Adam, let us make man, B'tzalmeinu, in our image, Kidmusenu, in our form and image. Shehu B'dugma Shel Amayla, man that Hashem created was made in the image of above, of heaven. V'koyches HaNefesh, and the soul powers that we have, they're divided into three general categories. Veheim, kochos. Listen to this. One, what we call koyach, powers. Hillel, chushim, talents. Ulevushim, and garments. And he's going to explain. Klolis, kulam, and all three. Hine yesh shehem atzmiyim. Within the three, there is the essential aspect of each of the categories, which we call atzmiyim, from the word etzem, essence. V'yesh mehem, and there are those same three categories, rak mispashtim, only the amount that they extend themselves. There is the essence and its extension, or better in English, the essence and its manifestation. So here, so we have 3 times 2 equals 6. There's the atzmiyim, the koichas atzmiyim, and the koichas mispashtim within the koichas. There's the concept of atzmiyim and mispashtim within the talents in the chushim. And there is the atzmiyim and the mispashtim in the levushim, in the garments. And Kamoi says, b'chushei hariyah, take, I translated it as talents. I take that back, Yonason, because I know Yonason is right away going to correct me, and he's right. It's not talents. In this context, it's senses. You understand? Am I right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really enjoy having Yonason and Yaakov and everyone else here because it keeps me on my guard.
Thank you.
I'm serious. That's what makes a good shir, when there's interaction between students and teacher. Okay. So he says, to take the senses, hariyah, seeing, shmiya, listening, hearing, v'reach, smelling, ulevush hadibur, and speaking. Says the Rebbe, shehin rak hispashtus ha'orem ha'nefesh. All of those 4 are only rak hillel, hispashtut, an extension, a manifestation of the soul's emanation, coming from the soul. Mashe yoitzin chutz la'atzmai. There is seeing, as it is a quality of essence in the soul. There is speaking, as speaking exists before I speak in my soul. So when we talk about the way we see and hear and speak and smell, usually we talk about it as it's extended, it manifested to the outside. Says the Rebbe, but you should know those same 4 chushim senses, those 3 senses and speech, are all found within the nefesh, within the soul. And he says, the sense of seeing and hearing, it's to see and to hear what's outside of itself. The difference is the when it comes to the sense of seeing, vision goes out of man's pupil. The teifes hadover anirin, it grabs the object that it sees. Conversely, v'chush hashmiya, when it comes to the sense of hearing, hine yoytze oir mehadover anishma. Oh, where does the light come out of? The thing that's being heard. You hear that? Listen to this. When you see Avram, it's coming from your eyeball. So something's coming from the eyeball to grab something that's outside of itself. When it comes to hearing, what's coming from the person who's speaking is absorbed by your ear. That's what he says. Uvechush hashmiya, when it comes to the sense of hearing, hine yoytze or mehadover anishma. Something comes from the thing that's being heard. V'nichnas, and it enters bi'oznei ha'odam, to the ears of man. The point being, both hearing and seeing are working with the outside. Right? They're working with the outside, whether it's you extending your eyeball to the outside and taking something in, or whether something that's being heard is being taken in by your ear. Nevertheless, the relationship is mehachutz, from the outside. He says we find also with speech. I'm speaking. Now, why am I speaking? Why didn't I think? Because if I would think now, you wouldn't hear anything. Garnish. I want you to hear what the Rebbe says. I want you to learn. So I need to speak. So when I'm speaking, it's called legalot el hazulat. I am accessing that part of me that reveals itself to you. And that's why, Yaakov, we say, Pesach, Chacham, Mahu, Omer, what does the Chacham say, is known, the famous interpretation. Chacham, the wise guy, the wise man. Mahu, who he is. Omer, that's what he says. You talk yourself out in your words. Rasha, Mahu, Omer. Tam, Mahu, Omer. Shenidei Elishol, Mahu, Omer. A fool doesn't have to do much, just talk. And everyone will know you're a fool. A chacham, same thing. A rasha, the same thing. Dibur, and why is that true? Why is that true? Because dibur, the notion, the idea of speech is such that it's relegated to the zulas. If its entire behavior of speech is for the outside, for someone else. Otherwise, you sit and thought. I just read the previous Rebbe went into a wagon in 1932 somewhere in Poland, and the driver says, "What's your name?" He doesn't want to really tell him his name, and he says, "What do you do?" And he says, "Not much." And then he says, "So, talk to me a little bit." And the Rebbe says, we accomplish much more from thinking than talking. Now, obviously, the Rebbe didn't want to, tell him, I'm the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and therefore he's going to jump out of his chair, and I didn't treat you well. And they have the same story with the Chafetz Chaim, when the guy gave the guy a slap, because he was speaking so bad about himself, self-deprecation. And then only later did he realize this was the Chafetz Chaim, and he went and he asked for Mechila, and the Chafetz Chaim said there's no need for Mechila. What we learned from this experience is that when you speak against yourself, when you put yourself down, it's also a form of Lashon Hara, self-deprecation. Let me just finish the thought and then we'll finish. Says the Rebbe, whether it's seeing, whether it's hearing, whether it's speech, it's only an extension of the energy. It's not the essence as the essence is in itself. How much energy is there in speech, seeing, and hearing? Mitzumtzam, very limited. We'll stop here, meaning that real chayis, real quality of energy is not in the extension, but in the essence. An example, Yaakov, simple example. Chas v'sholom, you're walking down the street, and you see someone pinned under a car. You go over and you pick the car up a little bit, you do whatever it is. How? Normally, you're a weakling. You can't do Hag Ben Shul because you didn't eat your Cheerios that morning. And here, when you see someone under a car, all of a sudden you become Shimshon HaGibor. How is that? The answer is that in the Koyches Atzmiyim, you have the Koyach. The way the Koyach is in its essential state, you're a Gibor. The way it is, Bihispashtut, in the extended state, in the manifested state, you're a weakling. Remember that, because that's a very profound idea to think about. Everyone, in the way they are, in etzem, in essence, is complete. If Chas v'Sholom Hashem made someone in etzem not complete, that's a cheshbon between Hashem and the person, and that's another discussion. But we're talking about this idea. I mean, it's a whole discussion. How do we see this from the vantage point of, disabilities and special needs and that whole field. How do we understand? Or I'm in yeshiva, or I'm in college, and the guy sitting next to me, he gets it right away, he understands it well, and I had to spend hours and hours. That doesn't mean that you're lacking the koyach. You have the koyach. And if you work, you have to work harder. You understand? Yes, that's true. Some of us have to work harder to be megale, to reveal the etzem. But in etzem, everyone has everything in a complete way. I want you to think about that thought. We'll talk about it more tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem. And any questions, comments, anything from anybody? No. Yes, Yonis.
Sure.
Thank you. Yes. Don't hear you, Yonis.
Yeah. You said the chushim, the 5 chushim, seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, and tasting.
Correct.
5 chushim. So where did the people ever get Dibu? Dibu is a koyach.
Oh, right. I was waiting for that question. And we'll talk about it tomorrow or in later shiurim. But I was waiting for the question. And another question that no one asked. What about the other 2 senses? Tasting and feeling. So far he doesn't mention that either. So let's continue learning and hopefully we'll have some...
Smelling. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Also smelling.
No, he says reyach. He does say it. He says smelling. Yeah, but you mean to say he doesn't elaborate on that. He only elaborates on Riyah Shmiya. The simple answer to that question is that generally in Chassidus we use Shmiya and Riyah. We talk about seeing and hearing. That's usually because for some reason people are more knowledgeable and in touch with seeing and hearing versus the other 3. I would say on a simple level that's the answer. But let's see if he says something more. Anyway, Hillel, Refuah Shalema, remember what we learned today. Every negative, every issue, every health issue and all that is for a greater positive. So I'm sure something greater is coming out of this in your life, and you have it a Refuah Shalema.
Amen.
This morning, we got to get the band back together.
Yeah. Get the band back. Chevre Lebedik, Zion Cheshvan. Today is the day when my wife had a miracle in California, Marin County, on the 101 freeway. She was driving back 10:30 at night from a Lamaze class. She was pregnant 7 months with my oldest child, my son. She was hit by a driver who was drunk, driving at 90 miles, being chased by the police. She spun around from lane 1 to lane 4. Took off her sheitel flew off. She put it on, took off her belt, and walked out. And the policeman escorted her home. And Baruch Hashem, we had the baby. It happened today, Zion Cheshvan. And then the Rebbe wrote me a letter. I had written to him, and I said, I don't get what happened over here. And if you have any insight, I would love to hear. And it was in January or February of the following year. And not the following year. In other words, this happened in November. I think that year was November. And a few months later, I got a letter from the Rebbe in the mail, and the Rebbe wishes her to have a healthy delivery and all that with a bracha. And then he writes the P.S. to me that the lesson from the episode that you described to me, you tell me about, is Goydel Inyan Hazrizut. The great importance of the idea of alacrity in all matters of goodness. He doesn't say b'chol inyoni Torah mitzvahs, b'chol inyoni tov. Anything that is good, act upon it now, not later. That's what the Rebbe wrote to Chaim Dolphin in 1985 or 87 in a letter. So that was... Yes.
What did you make of that?
It's a fascinating. I have a lot to say about it, but by nature, I am. I don't procrastinate by nature. So, what the question is even deeper to me. what is the Rebbe telling Chaim Dalfin about alacrity if that's the way really I act and behave? So I think that he wrote that because my wife, that wasn't a strength of hers. I think he was sharing a subtle message via me for her to do things more b'zrizut. I mean, this is my own interpretation, because
Yes.
and for me, I think it's a message to do things with alacriity, not just for Torah and mitzvahs, but tov, b'chol inyonei tov. In other words, when it comes to a mitzvah and to learning Torah, I was very much b'zrizut. But in other matters, not as much. So the Rebbe is sharing that the lesson here is that you should have the same alacrity, the same zrizut in any matter of goodness, whether it's a mitzvah or not, whether it's Torah learning or not. And I think that's something that was very helpful in many ways. Whether someone came to me in the 90s in Los Angeles and said, I need an operation on my back, I didn't ask him who, what, when. I said, here, I'm putting you under my organization's insurance and have the operation. And Baruch Hashem, it lasted for 30 years. B'chol inyonei tov. I didn't have to do it. And believe me, plenty of people would have said, no, you can't, You know what I'm saying? Chevra, I have another shiur. I'd love to talk. I got to go. Have a great day. Sei gesund. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.